Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for that wonderful music. We appreciate that so much. Take your Bibles and turn to Luke chapter 2. Luke chapter 2, Matthew chapter 8, and John chapter 14. Luke chapter 2, Matthew chapter 8, and John chapter 14. I am one that, for the most part, I try to eat healthy. But sometimes I have these crazy food cravings. And one of them is ice cream sandwiches, which I don't eat a lot of ice cream. I don't really care for ice cream a whole lot. But ice cream sandwiches and barbecue potato chips. And if you, yes, amen. If you've never tried that, it is awesome. It is just so good. Yeah, you take a bite of the ice cream sandwich and then just cram barbecue chips in your mouth. It is so good. It is fabulous. And the other day I was craving. It was I can't remember what it was called, but it's from Steak and Shake. But it's like a pepper jack cheeseburger, and I was craving that. And sometimes I crave those Parmesan garlic fries from Red Robin. Yum. I mean, it's so good. But it's like you want French fries and more French fries, and then a maple bacon donut for dessert. I mean, you just crave all that. And my point is, that's not really good. You know, we can't really eat what we want to eat whenever we want to eat, as much as we want to eat, without it clogging our arteries. Now, as bad as that is, there's something worse in life. And that is us wanting to live our life as we please, the way we want to live, and do whatever we want to do whenever we want to do it, with no one to answer to. And we just have that desire inside of us. But there's something even worse than that. And to me, it's a little bit of a strange thing. There are some people, and evidently you are not one of those types of people, but there are some people who want to live their life, do whatever they want to do without Jesus. They don't want Jesus to be involved. They don't want Jesus interfering. They don't want Jesus directing their life, directing what they do. They want to do everything in life that they can do, experience every experience, and really just have nothing to do with Jesus at all. Now, here's where, as strange as that is, here's where that kind of takes an even stranger turn. They just want to live life, enjoy life, just live life to the fullest, do whatever they want to do, have very little to do with Jesus, but then in the end, when their life is over, they are hoping for a big break. They are hoping that Jesus will look at them and that He will understand them. They are hoping that even though they had no room for Jesus whatsoever while they lived on this earth, that they never really gave any thought to Jesus whatsoever. They are really hoping that one day when they stand face to face with Jesus, He will give them a big break and make room for them in heaven. They're hoping that Jesus will look at them. You know, I understand you didn't have time, you didn't want to mess with me, you didn't have any thoughts of me while you were on earth, but welcome to heaven. Just come right on in. Now, I know that sounds strange, but it's the way people think. And I can understand, I certainly understand this. Some days, maybe even like a chilly day like today, it would have been nice if you could have. Maybe just kick back with a warm blanket, a cup of coffee, those Pillsbury cinnamon rolls, aren't they? Man, y'all won't last through the whole sermon. I'm making you hungry.
Amen.
Everybody's going to be leaving in a minute. Cindy, I'll preach to you. But, wouldn't that be nice sometimes? Just to sit back, wrap up in your blanket, and just relax. But no, you chose to be here because Jesus is important. So thank you for coming. Thank you so much for coming. You made room for him today. But let me go ahead and ask, how much room do you have for Jesus in your life? Are you ready? Are you ready for that day when you come face to face with Jesus? Do you know for sure he has room for you? I pray that you do. So today we're going to look at a small portion of the Christmas story from Luke chapter 2. It's really the story, it begins as the story of two people who were really committed to God. The story of Joseph and Mary. Both of them were poor, and they arrived in this little town, and I would imagine that not a lot of people noticed them, not a lot of people paid attention to them. We don't really know if anyone tried to help them. You would hope that someone would, because here's Mary. It's evident that she's pregnant. It's evident that she is close to the end of the pregnancy. You would hope someone would help them out, but we don't know if they did. But they had come to town to register for a census, a new law that has been put into place. And so let's begin looking at the story. It's Luke chapter 2, verse 1, and it says this, "And it came to pass in those days that a decree is simply a new law that went out from Caesar Augustus, that all," and this is a big undertaking. This is not an easy thing to do, what they are about to do. When this decree came out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. Registered in the Greek is just a simple word that means to make a list. To make a list of names, to make a list of addresses. It's just getting names and addresses so Rome could tax you. It's the Roman IRS, you could call it. Verse 2, this census, and that word census, it comes from the root word register. So both of those words can be translated. They're so similar. Both of them can be translated in the same way. They can be translated as taxes or list. So the census first took place while Quirinius was governing Syria. Verse 3. So all went to be registered, everyone to his own city. Now, the Romans sometimes, they would hire some of the Israelites, some of the Jews, to collect taxes, to do certain things for the Roman government. Likely, they had invited, they had hired some Jews to help with this registration. Now, history tells us that the Romans did not require that a family go to their birthplace to be registered. They could go anywhere. They could go to the city in which they lived in. But I found out that it was required by Jewish law, if you were a Jew, that you had to go to your own hometown, to your birthplace, so that you could register for taxes. So Now we're beginning to understand why Joseph went to Bethlehem. But there's one more reason that he went to Bethlehem that's more important. Joseph and Mary, they lived in the town of Nazareth. Bethlehem is about 85 miles away from Nazareth. Here's Mary. She is 9 months pregnant when they begin this journey. Mary is either walking or riding on a donkey. So how long would that take? How long would it take a pregnant woman to go from Nazareth to Bethlehem? Well, let's say that they were able to make 20 miles a day. Then you're looking at 4.5 days. If they were able to go 10 miles a day, just a little short of 2 weeks. And they're sleeping outside. Now, I told some of you folks last night, I don't like to sleep outside. So it would have been a really hard journey for me. It would have been tough. But they are sleeping outside under the stars. It's a tough terrain. So again, the question is, why? Why would they do that? Why would they put themselves through that? Well, the real reason is because God wanted them to. You see, God wanted His Son to be born in Bethlehem. This has been prophesied by the prophets. You can read about it all throughout the Old Testament. It is a fascinating prophecy. And you can see, as you read through the Old Testament, you can see little details here and little details here and little details here. And when you put it all together, I mean, the puzzle comes into a beautiful picture of what God was doing. One of my favorite places to look at this prophecy is the book of Ruth. And is it okay if the preacher gives you homework?
Yes.
Oh, y'all love homework? Go and read the book of Ruth. And it will not take you long. It's such a small book. And start looking for the pieces of the puzzle of this prophecy. It is just, it's so fantastic. And I'll give you a big hint. If you discover who Ruth is, you will begin to see this, and that puzzle will begin to come together. Ruth is the story of the Redeemer. So read the book of Ruth, discover who Ruth is, and you'll see this perfect, beautiful picture even come together in the book of Ruth. So here's Joseph. He had to go to Bethlehem. Had to go. Verse 4, Joseph also went up from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth into Judea to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David. So they had to come to this little town of Bethlehem. The town's name Bethlehem in the New Testament. In the Greek language, it means a place in Palestine. In the Old Testament, in the Hebrew language, it means house of bread. Bethlehem was this very, very fertile land. They just had fields and fields and fields of wheat and fig trees and olive trees. It's called the city of David. And there in the city of David, this baby boy was going to be born who would one day become our bread of life. The bread of life. The bread of life is about to be born in a place called the house of bread. So Joseph had to go to Bethlehem because God wanted Jesus to be born there. Verse 5, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed wife, who was with child. So Joseph and Mary, they make it to this little town of Bethlehem, and the Bible then says, verse 6, so it was while they were there, the days were completed for her to be delivered. She's ready to have the baby. They arrive in Bethlehem and she is ready. Verse 7, and she brought forth her firstborn. It says firstborn because Mary would have other children. So she brings forth her firstborn, son and wrapped him in swaddling cloths, that's just little strips of cloth, and laid him in a manger. A manger is simply a feeding trough for horses and cattle and different types of animal. So why in the world would Mary put baby Jesus in a feeding trough? Well, look, it tells us because there was no room for them in the inn. So, of course, that brings up the question, why wasn't there any room for them in the inn? And probably the most logical answer to that would be because other guests had gotten there first. It's likely that the inn was just so busy with other people that by the time Joseph and Mary got there, there was no room for them. If they had gotten there early, it's likely that they would have been given a room. But whatever the reason, when they make it to Bethlehem, there was no room for them in the inn. Now see, thousands of years, the Jews have been waiting for their Messiah, for their king. Prophets had prophesied that he was coming, priests had preached that they were coming, that the Messiah was coming, and now he finally arrived. He has finally made it, only to be laid in a feeding trough because there was no room for him in the inn. Listen, if he wanted to, he could have come into this world with all the dignity and royalty and glory of the upper class. He could have been ushered into this world with 10,000 angels announcing his coming. He could have come into this world as a celebrity with a standing ovation as all the people watched him come. He could have been born in a palace or a castle. He could have done any of that if he had chosen to. But instead, he gave up the throne and the riches of heaven to be laid in a manger. And the manger wasn't even his. Almost everything Jesus had when Jesus was on this earth was borrowed. He didn't own anything. It was a borrowed donkey on which he rode into Jerusalem those last days when he was going to die on a cross. It was a borrowed grave in which they buried him. When Jesus arrived in this world, there was no room for him. No room in Bethlehem. There was no room in Jerusalem. And worse than that, we learned last week that when he came into this world, Herod was so troubled that he wanted to kill Jesus. And that hatred for Jesus follows him all the way to the cross and beyond. Even to the day that you and I live in. You see, back then there was no room for Jesus on this earth. And that always makes me ask the question, has any of that changed? Is there any room for him today? I mean, you tell me, what country in this world wants him? Does our nation want him? Suppose we were to put it to a vote. Do you think our country would vote for Jesus? Do we have any room for him? Now, I may be completely out of touch. I think I've been told before I'm out of touch. But I may be completely out of touch, but I don't know of any country in the world that really wants Jesus, a personal God like Jesus. I don't believe there's a lot of room in Bethlehem, Jerusalem, anywhere in this world for Jesus. There's one amazing story in the Bible, and it's just burnt into my brain. It's one day Jesus and his disciples, they were out, and I believe the town was the town of the Gadarenes, and you can look it up later and double check me on that. But they were out, the disciples and Jesus, they were out on the Sea of Galilee. They get back to shore, and Jesus, he's getting out of the boat, and as he's getting out of a boat, this man who has these evil spirits runs up to Jesus. Now, this man lived in the graveyard. I mean, he was just a strange man. He lived in the graveyard. They would take chains and they would chain him up, or take ropes and tie him up, and he had gotten to the place where he could break the chains or break the ropes loose, and he would get loose and just be out of control, and everyone was afraid of him. Well, he comes running out of the graveyard, runs up to Jesus, and he kneels down, and he begins speaking to Jesus, and he says, "Son of God, what do you want with me? Promise me in God's name that you will not torture me." And Jesus asked the man, "Well, what's your name?" And the man says, "Legion," or lots, because I have lots of evil spirits in me. And he began to beg Jesus not to send these evil spirits away. Don't send them from me. And then he said, "Well, at least send them into the pigs." There was a herd of pigs that were not far away, and these evil spirits just begged him, "Please just send us into the pigs." And so Jesus did. There was about 2,000 of these pigs, and they ran over a cliff and into the lake and drowned. And so the people of the city, they hear about this. They hear about what had took place, and they all come running out to the shore where Jesus was, and there they see a man who was once full of all these demons, and he's sitting there and he's in his right mind. And do you know what the people did? Y'all know this story. You remember what the people did? Well, let me show you what they did. It's Matthew chapter 8. You can just turn back in your Bible a few pages to Matthew chapter 8. And I'll read to you from verse 34. All this has taken place. Now the people come and they confront Jesus. And here's what happened. Matthew chapter 8, verse 34. "And behold, the whole city," so everybody wanted to be in on this. Everyone came. "The whole city came out to meet Jesus. And when they saw him, they begged." That word "beg" in the Greek means to strongly encourage. To strongly encourage Jesus. They begged him to depart from their region. They begged Jesus to leave. Get out of here. Get away from our place. We don't want you here. They had no room for Jesus. I don't know if you know what that feels like, but that's a horrible feeling when you know no one wants you around. When, I don't know, if you've ever been in a room full of people and you know they don't want you there. I don't know if you know what that feels like. But it's a terrible, terrible feeling. And Jesus knew what that felt like. He knew what it felt like when his neighbors didn't want him in Nazareth. He knew what it was like that they disliked him so much, they would kill him if they could. There was no room for Jesus in Nazareth. There was no room for Jesus in Bethlehem. No room for Jesus in Jerusalem. No room for Jesus with the Gadarenes. No room for Jesus anywhere. It's a sad story. But there is some really, really good news. And that's how I want to finish today. I want to give you the good news. It's in John chapter 14. I'll read this to you and then we'll kind of wrap it up for today. This is the last hours of Jesus while he's on the earth. And I want you to see what he says to his disciples. John chapter 14, starting in verse 1, it says this: "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me." Now remember, he's just hours away from the cross. And he's telling them, don't let your heart be troubled. He's calming them down because he's so wonderful. "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me." Verse 2, "In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you." Now look at what Jesus does. He says, "I go to prepare a place for you." There was no room for Jesus while he was on this earth. Not many people wanted him. Not many people wanted to have anything to do with him. But the good news was, he wants to have something to do with you. He wants to make room for you in heaven. There's plenty of room for all of us. Plenty of room. There was no room for Jesus while he was on this earth, but he wants to make room for us. As a matter of fact, that's what he did when he went back to heaven. So I beg you, if you don't hear anything I've said today, hear this. Jesus has room for you. That's how much he cares for you. Make sure you have room for him in your life. There's nothing more important that you can do. A little over 2,000 years ago, Joseph and Mary went to Bethlehem to be registered. They get there, there's no room for them in the inn. There's the no vacancy sign up. Maybe simply because everything was just too busy. Everyone was flooding to the town. It was probably that simple. People were just too busy. And maybe, because of busy schedules, not because of outright hostility and hate for Jesus, maybe many people in our world today, they're just simply too busy for Jesus. It could be that simple for many folks. I mean, you think about our hearts and our minds, it's so occupied with so many other things that sometimes there's just no room left, just no time left for Jesus. Our schedule is full. We're not hostile toward Jesus. Our schedule's just too full. And we don't have time for Jesus. So let me ask the hard question this morning. Do you have real time for Jesus in your life? Would you stand with me? I have somewhere, I can't remember where, and I'm embarrassed to say this, I don't remember the author. You can come on, Scott. I don't remember the author, but I found this poem years ago. And I want to read this to you before we sing. And it is simply entitled "No Room." And it says this: "In the past there was for him no room in the inn. So he was born in a stable. No room in Herod's kingdom, so he was hunted. No room in Israel's thoughts, so he was rejected. No room in the world's comforts, so he had no place to lay his head. No room in Rome's plans, so he was executed. No room in some church programs, so he stood outside their door and knocked. And now today, there is for him no room in some people's hearts, so he cannot save them. No room in some people's thoughts, so we cannot give them wisdom. No room in some people's plans, so we cannot guide them. No room in some people's activities, so we cannot use them. No room in some people's time, so we cannot fellowship with them. No room in some people's speech, so we cannot commend them. No room in some people's homes, so we cannot live with them. No room in some people's possessions, so we cannot prosper them. No room in some people's commitments, so we cannot bless them. If today you have no room for Him, then do not be shocked when you discover in eternity that He has for you no thoughts, no plans, no activities, no time, no words, no home, no possessions, no room for you. How sad would that be? Make room for Him, because He makes room for you. I invite you to come, and maybe if you would like, you can bow and speak to God. You can do it right where you're standing, and just give Him your life and all the room that you have as we sing.